states are finding creative ways in which they can wiggle way in there. Yeah, no, this is now a taxable service, and so it's something you got to be aware of and watch out for. It's wild how the states get creative in finding ways to get more and more money, more tax dollars.
100%.
But yeah, they have a way.
Massachusetts is the one, I think, on the front lines of taxing digital products and other intangibles as well. I mean, they definitely are trying to increase their tax revenues through the sales tax imposition.
Hello, you are listening to the SALTcast by Peisner Johnson, the sales tax people. And for the last 30 plus years, we have been providing sales tax solutions and peace of mind to everyone we talk to. In June 2018, Economic Nexus was introduced to the US. Every state rushed to establish economic nexus thresholds. Massachusetts, however, maintains that they had their laws on the books since October 2017 and is trying to get companies to pay the sales tax retroactively. What does Jason and Paul think of this? Let's find out. Really covering, states trying to retroactively come after you and get sales tax. Collect the sales tax from you. Was this caused by the Wayfair decision? So
Well,
states
let's just
thinking
talk
they
a little
can
bit
go back?
about it. Yeah, how it came about, because the whole premise here is states were preparing for Wayfair to be decided, and in their hopes that Wayfair would be decided in their favor. Several states, maybe a dozen or so, passed legislation that essentially said out-of-state retailers sending goods into their state, customers in their state, established nexus, right? And at the time, it's like, no way. That's unconstitutional. You can't require me to collect your tax just because I have sales that go into your state. But they passed the legislation in 2017, and some of them maybe even earlier, in hopes that either a lawsuit would be filed or they would somehow be able to require out-of-state sellers to do this. So naturally, when it came to South Dakota, lawsuits were filed. It was ramped up, expedited so that it would go straight up through the ranks in South Dakota, and then would be required to go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So all of that expedited ran through, and then obviously in July of 2018, U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, that's a fair law. So the states who had passed legislation prior to that really didn't have a position to retroactively collect tax prior to that decision. Effective that decision, you could say, okay, because that law was deemed fair by the U.S. Supreme Court, then our law, if it was similar or followed similar patterns and had similar thresholds or protections, then that means our law is good as well. And so there were states that were ready to begin enforcing that legislation or economic nexus as early as July of 2018 when the decision was made. But take an assertive or an aggressive state like Massachusetts, they say, you know what? The law was deemed good. Our law was on the books effective October 2017. So we're actually going to require you to remit the tax you did not collect under the law that was not constitutional, going back to October 2017. And gratefully, there's some companies out there with the ability to say, no, that's not okay with us. And so I think there's 6 companies that have filed a lawsuit with Massachusetts against this retroactive approach that they have made. And there's probably hundreds, maybe thousands of companies that have probably complied with that retroactive. But it just brings up the question. It doesn't even seem fair, but can a state actually have the ability to retroactively collect tax. Sometimes the legislation has to say that this is retroactive in nature, which I think would get a lot of pushback.
Mhm.
But I believe it was in the Supreme Court case, South Dakota v. Wayfair, that there was a pushback on this idea of retroactive application of law prior to the date that the case was decided. So, yeah, I think it's I think it's just terrible that you have a state trying to collect tax from sellers who didn't collect that tax prior to the decision date.
Right. Well, because I'm just thinking, like, when these companies, they're probably just getting registered into the state of Massachusetts. Like, okay, now we have nexus because of the economic nexus thresholds. And so one of the questions on the questionnaire when you're getting registered is, when did you start doing business in Massachusetts? So they probably put, it could have been 2018. They're registering in 2022. Like, okay, well, now you owe us that. But I'm not sure if that's the exact scenario, or maybe they are already registered, but they didn't have Nexus.
Yeah, I think it's the latter. I don't think it's companies that are just now getting registered. I mean, just based off of materiality and how much tax these guys owe, a lot of them are the larger companies that have been around for a while that maybe they had a mom and pop shop in a neighboring state, and now they have this, economic nexus now just comes into play for them. And so now they're under audit. Hey, you got registered in 2018 because of economic nexus, but we actually are going to go back to 2017. And to Jason, to your point, it seems unruly, like are you joking, like, right now? And for certain taxpayers, it's just not material enough to fight it. But for these guys, it is material enough. I think they're looking at several $1 million in tax owed. And so, if we could pay an attorney or somebody to go, fight this and have to spend, a third or a quarter or less than that, I mean, it would be worth it from a materiality perspective. But yeah, a lot of them, I think it seems like more they're under audit because, you've been registered for a few years now, and now we're going to come audit and see what's new. But it could be. And that's for new registrants, for new taxpayers. They always want to know, is the state going to want to go back? Are they going to try and get me back for before I got registered? I mean, the statute of limitations doesn't apply if you didn't file a return and you didn't remit any tax. So there's no preventative measure here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's offensive to your core
Yeah.
to do this. But remember, this is companies that exceeded the threshold or the position that Massachusetts had before Wayfair.
Right.
Right. So if you just crossed a threshold under their economic nexus legislation in 2019, 2020, or even recently, then the state doesn't really have any recourse. The only time they have recourse is to say you exceeded the threshold prior to this date. And so if our effective date of the legislation is October of 2017 and you were exceeding the threshold at that time, then we require a registration or tax collected on sales made from that date forward. And so really it's this October to July period or October to June period where Massachusetts is saying, we believe you were doing business in our state based on our nexus laws, and therefore we're going to require it all the way back to that date. And I obviously I hope the taxpayers win, because there's nothing worse than a state passing a law that's not constitutional, and then once possibly it becomes constitutional, saying we're going to tie it all the way back to a date prior to what made it constitutional, right? And I don't want to get too political here, but but it's like offering something to somebody knowing it's not constitutional, you don't have the authority to do it. And then a lot of time goes by, and through the judiciary, they come back and say, yeah, you don't have the authority to do that. And you say, sorry, guys. I mean, it just didn't work out. Right? This idea of going beyond your political capacity to do something, like the state of
Yeah.
Massachusetts passing a law that said sellers outside the state of Massachusetts have to collect tax from sales that they make into Massachusetts. Just was not allowed under current Nexus guidelines or all of the court decisions that have been made in the last 4 or 5 decades related to sales tax. And I can appreciate that approach to just require it and try to get some compliance behind it, but it's beyond the pale to say we're actually going to take you back to that point because of Wayfair.
Right.
And we're seeing the same thing with income tax. I mean, this is what you're going to see as we roll forward with income tax. You're going to have states that say it's always been our law that you're supposed to pay income tax in our state if you have sales coming into our state. And you may have states that try to make that retroactive. But this definitely is bubbling up on the income tax side as well. And could be. What I find, or what I'm curious about, is if these 6 companies win and Massachusetts is deemed to not be allowed to go back to October of 17, but only July of 18, based on thresholds that were passed, will people who complied be able to get a refund? Because 2017 is beyond the statute of limitations to obtain a refund. So is it just, oops, yeah, we got your money? Because remember, this was not collected from customers and remitted to the state of Massachusetts. You as an agent of the state being the seller, this came out of your pocket with penalty and interest because you didn't comply to a law that wasn't compliable. I know that's not a word. And that came out. So are you going to have access to a refund even though those tax dollars were paid for a period that's outside the statute of limitations? I'm interested in how all this will play out, but
well, I think in regards to the refunds, you'll have to pay attention to how the state defines the statute, because some states it's based off of when the payment was made. Some it's based off of the period, so if I made a payment in 2023, but it was for a 2017 period,
give me that money back.
Yeah, I made it. So it just depends. But it's also not super surprising that Massachusetts is being this creative, if you will. If you'll recall,
that's a kind word.
If you'll recall, Massachusetts was one of the few states that established what they called cookie nexus, by simply going to a website and now I've got internet cookies. Well, now I have nexus in Massachusetts. I mean, they're just finding more and more creative ways. It reminds me of another discussion we had recently with a client about services. I mean, services aren't subject to tax. You're right. But states are finding creative ways in which they can wiggle way in there. Yeah, no, this is now a taxable service. And so it's something you got to be aware of and watch out for. And it's wild how the states get creative in finding ways to get more and more money, more tax dollars.
100%.
But yeah, they have a way.
Massachusetts is the one, I think, on the front lines of taxing digital products and other intangibles as well. I mean, they definitely are trying to increase their tax revenues through the sales tax imposition.
Yeah,
it's really interesting. And you bring up another topic that's probably good for another podcast, but every service is not what you might think it is, right? We come across plenty of individuals, plenty of companies who are providing a service, and they're like, our service is not taxable. This is the name of our service, right? Now, I get it. It may not be as direct as you think it is that this is taxable, but it depends on what the state classifies or defines your service as under their statute. And so you very well may be providing a taxable service, that you might think is not taxable, but if you were to look at how the state would classify it, it may fall under a taxable category. But that's
Totally
probably
agree.
a conversation for another day.
Totally agree.
Yeah, I'm with you, Jason. If Massachusetts wins, I'm sure there'll be a lot of other states that are gonna, jump on the bandwagon. So you can expect that.
No,
So
there's too many other wonderful states that would never do that to outside
Hey.
sellers.
Your
it's
sarcasm
all
is coming
it's
through
all
so brightly.
it's all perspective.
I don't want to take it as far as it's an immorality, but I mean, it seems immoral to ask somebody to comply with something before it was legally, yes, I'm going to use the word again, compliable.
Compliable. We're going to add that one to the Webster Dictionary, or Wikipedia at least.
Indeed. I'm going to go do it right now because I'm allowed to do that.
That's good.
Listen,
That's good.
If Massachusetts does start, offering refunds, I don't think they're going to publicize that. But it's definitely something we can help out with, especially if you're remitting quite a bit.
100%.
So yeah, pay attention. If you had to retroactively pay your sales tax, and it comes down
That's
on
not
the
our
side
fee,
of the
by the
companies.
way. I'm just in agreement with you. Our fee is not 100%, but I am in agreement that we can help you with that for sure.
Sweet. Well, I think that pretty much covers the topic. Thank you guys for being on with me today, and I know we'll see you guys at another one.
Awesome. Have a good one, guys.